I never thought there would come a day when I'd be sitting across from my father-in-law in an emergency boardroom meeting. Him begging for an extension on a loan from the very bank I run. He used to look at me with such disdain, the coffee-serving waitress as he once sneered. But today, his eyes were filled with desperation and regret. If you believe honor is bought with money, let me tell you the story of how a proud man was humbled by his own arrogance. I didn't seek revenge. I simply let the truth rise to the surface, and oh, it cut deeper than any insult he ever threw at me. You know what's ironic? For nearly 2 years, my husband's entire family had no idea who I really was. They saw me wiping tables and pouring coffee, assumed I was some nobody. Meanwhile, every week, I was approving corporate loans worth hundreds of times more than their entire net worth. My name is Harper, I'm 32, born and raised in Follett, Idaho, a place far from the glitz of coastal cities like Los Angeles or the bustle of Chicago. But to me, it was home, a place where every grain of soil seemed to carry a speck of my family's sweat and devotion. We weren't just poor, we were struggling to breathe. Breakfast sometimes was a few slices of stale bread my mom got free from a kind local baker. My dad, a truck driver, used to travel cross-country for weeks, hauling goods from one state to another, just so we could afford the bare basics. Mom worked 2 jobs, cashier at a thrift store by day, dishwasher at a small diner by night. Our one respite as a family was hearing Dad say, "Knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you, Harper. They can steal your car, your money, even your hopes, but what you learn is yours forever." It didn't mean much to me back then, but I listened. While my classmates spent weekends hanging out at the arcade or scrolling endlessly on their phones, I holed up in our tiny public library, volunteering in exchange for a quiet place to read. In summer I worked any odd job that came my way. Babysitting, yard work, dog walking, anything that could earn an extra dollar. In winter, I shoveled driveways for folks in the neighborhood, sometimes starting before dawn. Every penny went into a savings jar I kept under my bed, marked college or bust. After years of grinding, I won a full-ride scholarship to Riverside University, majoring in finance. From the moment I set foot on that campus, I knew I was where I needed to be. Surrounded by towering buildings, the hum of ambitious students, professors who'd authored best-selling economics textbooks, I finally understood what Dad meant. Knowledge truly opened doors I never knew existed. Graduating top of my class, I landed a position at a prestigious investment bank. Suddenly, I found myself in a world of glass skyscrapers, multi-million-dollar deals, and boardroom negotiations that felt more like chess matches. Within a handful of years, I climbed the ranks to become a regional CEO at SkyShield Bancorp, managing a corporate credit portfolio worth over $8 billion. That was a number so large it made seasoned execs wary, but I didn't flaunt it. I didn't plaster it on social media or brag at fancy mixers. I just kept my head down and got the work done. And on weekends, I did something no one in my office could fathom. I took off my tailored blazer, hopped into my modest car, drove to Addison's downtown, and put on my familiar gray apron at Riverbean Cafe. Why? 'Cause I loved it. The bitter yet soothing aroma of freshly ground coffee beans, the jingle of the entry bell, the comforting hum of the milk steamer, those simple things grounded me. In that cafe, I was just Harper, the friendly barista who drew hearts on lattes and asked customers about their day without hidden agendas. That's where I met David. It was pouring that day, the sky a deep swollen gray that dumped buckets of rain on the city. Just before closing, the bell tinkled, and in he walked, drenched to the bone, water dripping off his coat onto the floor. He smiled, warm, a little sheepish, and said, "10 cappuccino, please. Extra foam if possible. And, well, maybe something to make this day less miserable." I laughed quietly, drew a tilted heart on the foam with a toothpick, and offered it to him. He took one sip and said, "This is the best I've felt in 3 days." The next day he returned, shirt slightly wrinkled, hair a bit disheveled, but eyes bright. "I think I'm addicted to the coffee here," he joked, settling onto a stool. From that moment, it became a sweet routine. Every time he came in, we'd chat about life, share a laugh, sometimes talk about dreams or regrets. He said he was an architect, recently established his own small firm in Addison after leaving a big corporate job in Boston. I wanted to design sustainable homes, he explained. Buildings that aren't just fancy showpieces, but actually help the environment and the people who live in them. My heart softened each time we talked. He wasn't trying to impress me with prestige or wealth. He was simply David, telling me about the solar panels he installed on a community center for free, or the ramp he built for a disabled neighbor. One evening after I locked up the cafe, he was waiting outside with an umbrella. "Would you like to join me for dinner?" he asked, his eyes hesitant but hopeful. I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid of what might happen when he found out who I really was. Still, I agreed. We ate at a casual barbecue joint near the corner of 8th and Warren. No candlelit ambience, just vinyl seats and a smoky smell that clung to our clothes. But it felt right. As we devoured brisket and coleslaw, David talked about his childhood, how his father, Albert Hillcross, once ran a successful real estate business that grew from a single renovation project. David mentioned that after a downturn, his family became fixated on never losing status again. I noticed a subtle sadness in his voice whenever he spoke about them. "I guess that's why I crave something more authentic," he said, turning to me. Well, you seem real, Harper." He didn't know the half of it. Still, I just nodded and offered him a half smile. It was the first time in years I felt someone saw me for who I was, not for my job title or net worth. When David asked me to be his girlfriend, I said yes without a second thought. Months drifted by like pages in a well-loved book. David often teased me. "How many cappuccinos do I need to buy before you tell me your secrets?" I'd simply grin and say, "Trust me, they're not that interesting." But part of me was terrified of the day he'd learn the full extent of my position, my success. Would he see me differently? Would I lose the one space where I could just be me? Then, inevitably, David asked me to meet his family. It was a brisk Saturday afternoon when he drove me out to Brookford, where the Hillcross estate sprawled across acres of manicured lawns and lavish gardens. A stone gate, tall and imposing, opened to reveal a mansion with neoclassical columns, shimmering white under the midday sun. David shot me an apologetic glance. "They can be difficult," he warned. "They judge people on status. Just don't let them get to you." I squeezed his hand. "Don't worry," I said with a faint smile. "I've faced worse." But my stomach nodded. I'd grown up with so little, and here I was, stepping into a palace that dripped with the kind of money and snobbery I had consciously avoided. David's father, Albert, greeted us in the grand foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier. He was tall, broad-shouldered, hair going silver at the temples, and he had that bearing of a man used to commanding entire boardrooms. He barely looked at me as he shook my hand, not so much a greeting but more like testing my grip. His wife, Catherine, wore a designer dress in a shade of teal that matched her eyes, her features sculpted into a perpetual look of mild disdain. The moment I said, "Hi, I'm Harper, I work at a coffee shop," Catherine's expression twitched. "You serve coffee?" she echoed, as though I'd confessed to a felony. Their daughter, Elise, who was halfway through an MBA at some esteemed university, just smirked from behind a glass of champagne. "Well," she quipped, "at least she has a job. That's admirable." Over dinner, I endured countless backhanded comments. Catherine fussed over the dinnerware, ignoring me unless it was to highlight some difference between me and the so-called proper society they inhabited. Albert punctuated every question with a condescending remark. "What do you plan to do, Harper? Open a chain of coffee carts? Or don't you get bored repeating the same motions all day?" Elise rolled her eyes so frequently, I worried they might get stuck. David tried to defend me, but his family bulldozed him with scorn. That night, when we were back in David's car, driving down the long winding road from the estate, I asked, "Are you sure about me?" My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. David squeezed the steering wheel. "I'm sure about us," he said, turning to me with an intense, unwavering gaze. "I don't care what they think. We dated for another year amidst constant jabs and disapproval. Catherine arranged blind dates for David behind my back, hoping he'd come to his senses. Albert would give lectures on marrying within one's circle, while Elise sent me snide texts like, "How's the latte life?" But David stood by me. When David proposed, it was on a hot July afternoon at a local park near Addison's lakefront, the water shimmering under a brilliant sun. He got down on one knee, sweat beading on his forehead, ring in hand. "I want you, Harper, all of you. Even if my family never accepts us." Tears sprang to my eyes and I nodded, choking out a breathless, yes. As expected, his family's reaction was nuclear. Albert thundered, "If you marry this girl, you'll be cut off. No inheritance, no position in my company. And I'll make sure everyone knows you made this choice." David took his father's words stoically. "Dad," he said softly, "I'm not marrying you. I'm marrying her." Catherine shrieked about family honor. Elise joined in, saying I was gold-digging. What they didn't realize was that I didn't need any gold from them. I was far better off financially than they could ever have guessed. But I kept that to myself. We had a small wedding, just us, a few close friends, and the sweet old pastor from my childhood church in Follett. It was held in a tiny floral garden behind that church, morning sunlight filtering through the leaves, forming patterns on our hands as we exchanged vows. David wore a simple suit. I wore an off-white dress I'd saved up for. We both cried, we both laughed, and we sealed our marriage with the rawest, most genuine kind of love. Albert, Catherine, and Elise did not attend, nor did they send even a text of congratulations. We rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Addison, near an old bookstore that sold dusty hardcovers for under $5. Every Monday through Thursday, I'd go to the shining tower of Sky Shield Bancorp in my pressed suits, commanding boardrooms, analyzing million-dollar deals, approving or denying corporate loans that shaped entire industries. Then on the weekends I'd return to Riverbean Cafe, slip on my apron, and delight in the simpler joys. The hiss of the espresso machine, the smell of fresh croissants, the occasional chat with a lonely college student. David knew I was in finance. He'd seen me studying spreadsheets and attending late-night virtual conferences. But he never asked for details, never pried into my salary or position. "All I care about," he'd say, "is that you're doing what fulfills you." And in that moment, I realized I'd found a rare man who loved me, not my bank account. Meanwhile, David pursued his passion for sustainable architecture, working with non-profit organizations to design eco-friendly homes. He often returned home coated in sawdust, excitedly telling me about a new energy-saving method or a reclaimed wood project. One unremarkable Tuesday, while combing through corporate loan applications, I froze at a familiar name. Hillcross Holdings. My stomach tightened. That was Albert's real estate conglomerate. I examined the file. It showed a massive request for a bridge loan to cover short-term liquidity issues. As I analyzed the data, something felt off. The numbers didn't add up. Substantially overvalued properties, shell companies stashed in offshore tax havens, contradictory assets filed under different subsidiary names. I discovered suspicious transactions that hinted at money laundering or, at the very least, large-scale fraud. Alarms spiked through my veins. On one hand, this was my husband's family business. But on the other hand, my job was to protect the bank's integrity. I took a deep breath, pressing my fingertips against my temple. "Separate your feelings, Harper," I told myself. "You must do what's right." That night, I didn't mention it to David. Couldn't, not yet. I needed more proof, a clearer perspective. A week later, my suspicions were confirmed by the bank's internal audit department. The entire empire Albert had built was a house of cards, precariously balanced on falsified documents and hidden liabilities. Protocol demanded we initiate a deeper investigation and freeze the loan. The next day, I quietly issued an audit directive, ensuring Hillcross Holdings' account was scrutinized with the same rigor I'd applied to any other client. As if on cue, a glossy black envelope arrived in our mailbox the following week. It was an invitation to the Hillcross family's annual estate gathering. Gold embossing, immaculate calligraphy, the whole 9 yards. We cordially invite David Hillcross and his wife to our formal event, it read. There was no personal note, just the formal details. The date, the time, and a reminder to dress appropriately. David looked at me. "Do you want to go?" he asked softly. He was torn. For all their flaws, they were still his blood. "Yes," I replied after a moment. "Let's see what they want." Beneath my calm exterior, I suspected something was up. Maybe they realized the scandal looming over them and hoped to use the gathering as a shield. Or maybe they were simply going through the motions. Either way, I was done playing the part of the frightened bride. The day of the gathering, I dressed in a sleek black sheath dress, no flashy jewelry, hair in a simple updo. We drove through the estate gates, the same impressive stone columns rising like silent sentinels. The garden was decorated with fairy lights, a string quartet played in the distance, and waiters in crisp attire circulated with trays of champagne. The place was teeming with society's upper crust, all laughing and exchanging polite gossip. No sooner had we stepped onto the marble patio than Elise spotted us. She raised an eyebrow, swirling her champagne flute. "Oh, the barista's here," she sneered, loud enough for a few onlookers to glance our way. Catherine swooped in, wearing an emerald gown that screamed wealth. "Darling," she cooed to David, brushing off my presence. "How is married life in that quaint apartment?" Before David could speak, Albert strode into the center of the crowd, tapping a spoon against his glass. The music silenced, and all eyes locked on him. "Thank you all for coming," he announced, posture rigid, "to celebrate another prosperous year for Hillcross Holdings, and to welcome back my son David with his wife." The tone with which he said wife made my skin prickle. In that moment, a Hillcross Holdings employee, fidgety, wearing a tight expression, rushed out from the house. "Mr. Hillcross," he whispered, but it was still audible enough that the hush in the garden heard it. "The bank just called. They said our loan application is denied. They're freezing everything pending a new audit." Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Albert's face turned gray, the glass slipping from his grip and shattering on the stone floor. Catherine's eyes bulged while Elise sputtered, What do you mean, denied?" I stepped forward, heels clicking sharply against the marble. "It's true," I said, voice calm but resonant. "I'm the regional CEO at SkyShield Bancorp. I requested the deeper audit when I noticed irregularities in Hillcross Holdings' financial statements." Albert's jaw literally dropped. He stared at me like I'd just declared I was from another planet. "You run the bank," he uttered, voice cracking. The crowd began to buzz with whispers, heads turning from Albert to me, searching for confirmation. "Yes," I answered. "I have been for quite some time. And your company is under scrutiny for fraud." I let that final word linger in the air. Elise took a stumbling step back, her face going pale. Catherine pressed a hand to her chest, speechless. Then Albert attempted to regain control, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You can't do this to your own family," he yelled, spittle flying. "You made it clear you never considered me family," I said quietly. "And even if you had, fraud is fraud. You, of all people, should know that money doesn't bend the rules if the right person is watching." David stepped beside me, eyes cold. "Dad, you made your choices. Harper is just doing her job." Albert fumbled for a retort, but no words came. I turned to walk away, David's hand in mine, leaving behind the stunned hush of guests who had just witnessed the fall of an empire. Within days, Hillcross Holdings stock plummeted as news of the audit spread. Investigations by federal agencies were launched, and the media had a field day. "Hillcross Empire on the verge of collapse," read one headline. Another declared, "Architect's wife at the center of financial storm." My phone buzzed incessantly. Reporters, curious acquaintances, old college classmates. I gave no statements. The truth was in the documents. Catherine's social circle evaporated. Friends she'd bragged to for decades stopped taking her calls. Elise, implicated by her involvement in signing off on suspicious transactions, faced legal repercussions. And Albert? He tried to mount a defense, claiming ignorance of certain deals, but the paper trail told a different story. His own employees turned on him to save themselves, producing evidence of the shell companies he'd authorized. It wasn't revenge I felt, but an odd sense of resolution. The lies were unraveling, that was all. During that turbulent time, David was quietly supportive. At night, he'd sit with me on our worn-out couch, holding my hand in silence. We both knew the consequences of my actions would be life-changing for his family, but he never once suggested I do otherwise. "Integrity matters more than loyalty to people who never offered us any," he said one night, softly kissing my temple. When the indictments came, Albert was sentenced to several years in prison for financial fraud and money laundering. Elise got a lighter sentence but still faced prison time for her role. Catherine, left with little, was forced to sell off what remained of their possessions to pay legal fees. In the blink of an eye, the proud high society Hillcross name crumbled. Reporters snapped pictures of Catherine emerging from a discount supermarket, rummaging for coupons. I wish I could say I felt triumphant, but mostly I felt relieved. Relieved that I no longer had to hide my identity. Relieved that David was free from a family that had tried to control him. And relieved that I had done the right thing, both as a bank officer and as a person. A few months later, one crisp autumn morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Catherine standing there, dressed in a simple beige coat, her face devoid of the polished makeup I'd once known her for. She held a small Tupperware container. "Hello, Harper," she said, voice trembling. I know I have no right to ask, but may I come in?" I stepped aside, my heart pounding. This was the woman who had once ridiculed me for serving coffee. She set the container on the table and pulled off the lid, revealing slightly misshapen, homemade cookies. "I made these," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "They're a bit burnt. I'm not really good at baking, but I'm trying." We stood awkwardly, the tension thick as honey. Then she said words I never thought I'd hear from her. "I'm sorry, Harper. Truly sorry. I know I can't undo the past, but after everything fell apart, I realized how blind I'd been. I thought status and wealth defined our family. I was wrong." I felt a swirl of anger, pity, and surprising compassion. "People make mistakes," I said softly. "Some bigger than others. I can't pretend none of it happened, but maybe we can move forward." Catherine's tears spilled as she nodded, and for the first time, I saw a real person behind the mask of superiority. David came home that evening to find his mother sitting at our small kitchen table, sipping tea with me. He paused in the doorway, disbelief etched on his face. Then, slowly, his gaze softened. He walked over, pulled up a chair, and joined us. In the weeks that followed, Catherine moved into a modest apartment, finding work at a local flower shop. She started with simple tasks like trimming stems and organizing deliveries, but the job seemed to anchor her, giving her a sense of purpose. Sometimes she'd come over to our apartment with a bouquet of slightly wilted flowers, apologizing that she couldn't afford better. I'd simply smile, set them in a vase, and thank her. Little gestures can change everything. Eventually, I discovered I was pregnant. We were overjoyed. David's eyes glistened the moment I told him, and he swept me into his arms. "We'll make a home full of honesty," he murmured against my neck. "No illusions, no lies, just truth and love." The months passed, a mix of morning sickness, doctor's appointments, and a new sense of hope. Catherine visited often, offering help in the ways she could. When she first placed a hand on my growing belly, I saw tears brimming again. She whispered, "Thank you, Harper, for giving me a second chance to be part of this family." I just nodded, feeling something warm bloom in my chest. The baby kicked, and Catherine laughed, swiping at tears. Life, so fragile and pure, reminded us that the future is always more important than the past. When our daughter arrived, we named her Hope. The moment I held her in my arms, her tiny fingers curling around mine, I felt a profound peace. David, leaning over us, kissed my forehead. "She's perfect," he said. "Just like you." My heart swelled, tears slipping down my cheeks. "No, she's just everything," I whispered. That day, Catherine hovered near the hospital bed, gently stroking Hope's cheek. "I promise you, little one," she said, voice trembling, "I'll be the best grandmother I can be. And I will never let my pride stand in the way of loving you." We brought Hope home to our cozy apartment, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, creating patterns on the nursery wall. David had built a wooden crib himself, using reclaimed pine, designing it to be sturdy, safe, and eco-friendly. Catherine, no longer wearing heels that clicked ominously down marble hallways, kicked off her flats and settled onto the living room couch, a diaper bag in her lap. We talked, laughed, learned how to change diapers, and discovered it's not exactly glamorous but absolutely worth it. Some days were tough. Hope's colic had us both running on minimal sleep. But each time she gave a little coo or smiled in her sleep, we felt life's challenges melt away. I kept my role at Sky Shield Bancorp, transitioning to a flexible schedule. Board meetings were mostly remote for a while, allowing me to balance my career with motherhood. On weekends, I still visited River Bean Cafe for a few shifts whenever possible. My coworkers teased me for taking a break from the high-stakes corporate world to serve cappuccinos. But for me, it was never a step down. It was home. Every so often, customers would come in, share a piece of their world with me, and leave with a warm drink and maybe a warmer heart. There was a teenage boy who confided how anxious he was about college. A retired teacher who missed her classroom so much that she sat writing poetry in the corner. I'd offer them extra foam hearts, a smile, sometimes a word of encouragement. Those moments reminded me that life's big deals and big successes mean nothing if you lose touch with the small human connections that keep your soul alive. Catherine's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic. She started volunteering at a local shelter, teaching basic flower arrangement and baking to women who wanted to learn new skills. One day, I visited her class, quietly watching from the back. She demonstrated how to sift flour properly, explaining tips she'd learned from YouTube tutorials. The women listened intently, occasionally sharing laughter as they compared their messy baking results. Catherine looked up, saw me, and smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. In that moment, I glimpsed the goodness she'd buried for so long under layers of social climbing and haughtiness. Meanwhile, life outside our bubble moved forward. The Hillcross name was tarnished beyond repair, and the estate eventually went to auction. Albert, serving his sentence, had time to reflect, or so we hoped. Elise, upon release, found herself friendless, forced to start over. We heard she moved to another state, trying to piece her life back together. David reached out once, but she never answered. Maybe she just needed space to rediscover who she was without her old illusions. As for me, whenever a colleague or an old acquaintance asked how I felt about taking down the Hillcross empire, I told them the truth. I didn't destroy anything. I only made sure the truth was seen. Because that's the core of it. If a structure is built on lies and arrogance, it's only a matter of time before it collapses on its own. I simply turned on the light. One evening, when Hope was about 6 months old, Catherine dropped by with a casserole. She still managed to burn the edges, but the gesture made my heart swell with gratitude. After dinner, she and I sat on the balcony, the sky painted with streaks of purple and gold as the sun set. Softly, Catherine spoke. "I want to thank you, Harper, for forgiving me. You had every reason to hate me, to cast me aside. But you chose to show me grace. I didn't deserve it." I took her hand gently, remembering the many nights I cried over how she treated me. "Everyone deserves a chance to change," I said. I didn't want to let bitterness define our future, especially with Hope in the picture. She squeezed my hand back, her eyes shining with unspoken gratitude. Somewhere in the apartment, we heard David's tender voice cooing to Hope, lulling her to sleep. Time has a way of softening the jagged edges of pain. Seasons changed, and with each passing month, I discovered new layers of love and depth in my marriage. David continued designing homes that merged art with eco-consciousness. I thrived in my role at Sky Shield Bancorp, eventually earning a national VP position, though I still kept a low personal profile. Hope grew quickly, crawling, babbling, eventually walking. Her first word was "Mom," which made me cry tears of joy. Her second word was "Bean," presumably because she spent so much time in the cafe with me. We laughed every time she said it. One afternoon, a college student sat in the cafe, eyes red from tears, scribbling on a notebook. I brought her a mug of chamomile tea, lightly sweetened. "It's on the house," I said softly, pulling up a chair. She looked up, sniffling. "I can't do it anymore. My parents think my art major is a joke. They said I'm wasting my potential." Her voice cracked. I placed a hand gently over hers. "When I was your age, I was sweeping snow off sidewalks and saving tips from a diner just to chase a dream nobody in my neighborhood ever had. Keep going. The people who truly love you will learn to respect your passion. And you'll find a path that's yours alone." She smiled tearfully. "Thank you," she whispered. In that moment, I remembered how a single act of kindness could change someone's trajectory. Mine had been changed by scholarships, by mentors, and by the unwavering drive my parents instilled in me. As for Catherine, she became a doting grandmother. She showed up for every small milestone in Hope's life, from her first steps to her first day at a nearby preschool. No fancy gifts, just heartfelt presence and the occasional bunch of flowers. We never turned her away. The past was the past, and the future belonged to those willing to grow. On a crisp fall morning, when bright leaves swirled around the sidewalk and a gentle breeze carried the aroma of cinnamon from the bakery next door, I found myself reflecting on how my life had turned out. I was once just a coffee girl to the Hillcrosses. Now I was their daughter-in-law, a mother, a top executive, and maybe even a beacon of second chances. Did I feel victorious? Maybe. But more than that, I felt content, at peace with the fact that I never stooped to their level of cruelty or snobbery. I just let the truth rise above the lies. A few days later, I sat out on the balcony, scribbling in a small notebook while Hope napped in the living room. David came over, resting a hand on my shoulder. "What are you writing?" he asked. I flipped the notebook shut, smiling. "Just journaling for Hope," I answered. "So one day she'll know how much we overcame. Poverty, prejudice, betrayal, and how much love can transform even the coldest hearts." David nodded, pressing a light kiss to my temple. "Let's teach her that no amount of money, no social standing, can ever replace honesty and compassion." I gazed up at him, the man who chose me over the illusions of his old life, and whispered, "Yes, let's." It's funny in a way. Everything that happened, the heartbreak, the rage, the exposed fraud, the stony looks of disbelief, led to this moment of calm. A moment in which I know, without question, that staying true to who I am was worth every painful confrontation. Some might call it a revenge drama, but in my eyes, it's more a testament to truth and justice. Revenge, fueled by hatred, can consume you. But letting the truth speak for itself, that's a cleansing fire, one that eventually leaves the ground fertile for new growth. Hope turned 2 last month. We threw a small party in our backyard, Catherine helping blow up balloons while David set up a little table of snacks. A few of my co-workers from Sky Shield Bancorp came, some of David's architecture friends, and a couple of neighbors from the apartment complex. We sang off-key, ate half-burnt homemade cupcakes, and played silly party games. If you told me 5 years ago that I'd be entertaining a child's birthday party with my once despised mother-in-law grinning beside me, I'd have called you crazy. But life changes, and people can change if they open their hearts enough. As the party wound down, I found Catherine laughing at a joke one of David's friends told. She caught my eye, walked over, and gently touched my elbow. "I just wanted to say, Harper," she murmured, "I'm proud to have you in this family." My eyes welled. "Thank you," I breathed. And in that moment, I felt the final traces of old wounds fade. Because true forgiveness is not just about words. It's about seeing someone stand on the other side of a bridge you both built from the broken pieces of your past. Now, as I rock Hope to sleep in her cozy little room, The lullabies drifting through the soft glow of a nightlight. I think about how far we've come. Albert is still incarcerated, serving his time. We haven't visited, and David admits he's not sure if he wants to. Maybe, someday, father and son will meet again under different circumstances. Or maybe they won't. Either way, David and I have chosen to focus on building a life of honesty and compassion. We have dreams for the future. Perhaps a small house of our own, with a yard for Hope to run around in, maybe a second child. I still plan to keep my routine of managing multi-million-dollar deals by weekday and donning my coffee apron by weekend. Some might say it's a contradiction, but to me, it's balance. It's remembering where I came from, how I got here, and the difference a single cup of coffee can make in someone's life. I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. Not to the society that underestimated me, not to the in-laws who once mocked me, and not even to myself. My worth isn't tied to my title or the money I earn, or the illusions people have about success. It's in the love I share, the kindness I extend, and the integrity I refuse to compromise. What do you think about Harper's choices, and how she faced judgment from her in-laws? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to stay tuned for more stories about family, trust, and resilience. Because in the end, all it takes is one moment of truth, or one cup of coffee, to change a life forever.